President Trump warns about coming danger in the Middle East as Americans begin to leave the region. California Democratic Senator Alex Padilla hauled out of a DHS press conference and handcuffed. We'll have a report from the scene and reaction. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy remakes the panel advising on future vaccines. Who's out? Who's in? What it might mean. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. President Trump takes great pride in refusing to discuss military actions before they happen or even hinting what might be coming, but not today. The president this afternoon said an Israeli assault on Iranian nuclear facilities could very well happen, and there is a chance of massive conflict in the Middle East. Those are quotes. The president also said he gave the order advising U.S. embassy personnel and military family members that it is okay and possibly advisable to leave Iraq and other parts of the region, saying that advice could well save lives. CBS News reporting confirms Israel is not only contemplating a military attack on Iran, that's been true for months, if not years, but importantly, is moving closer than ever to a launch decision. CBS News also reports, the U.S. is unlikely to participate, a decision that could isolate Israel and undercut the effectiveness of any military mission to locate and disable Iranian nuclear facilities, some of which are buried deep underground. Israel, according to CBS News reporting, believes Iran is particularly vulnerable now, having lost regional clout in Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. Now, this could all be positioning and posturing. We know that more U.S. talks with Iran about the future of its nuclear program are scheduled for this weekend. We begin tonight with Eleanor Watson at the Pentagon. Eleanor's friends call her Ellie, and she's a friend of the show. So, Ellie, please tell us what your reporting is on this ever-evolving topic and region.
So U.S. officials have told CBS that Israel is all set to launch strikes against Iranian nuclear sites and has been for a few weeks. Over the past year, Iran's proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah have been decimated, and Iran itself has suffered hits to its own air defenses in retaliation for missiles it launched at Israel. So from Israel's perspective, there is no better time than the present to try and do some severe damage to Iran's nuclear program. President Trump has said today that he prefers diplomacy to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. He said that any strike while negotiations are ongoing could blow up any chance of a deal. And as you mentioned, negotiations as of now are expected to continue, with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff headed to Oman for the 6th round of talks with Iran. But the U.S. did advise some personnel to leave the Middle East yesterday in case Israel decides to go at this alone.
And Ellie, what is the sense there at the Pentagon about U.S. either involvement or getting a heads up about whatever Israel might or might not do?
The sense right now is the U.S. does not want to participate in this strike, that Israel, if it goes, could very well go alone. But what the U.S. is concerned about is what retaliation would look like and whether or not Iran follows through on its promise to, if Iran talks fail, if Iran is attacked, then Iran has threatened to target U.S. bases. There are still 3,000 troops in Iraq, 1,000 troops in Syria still fighting ISIS, and particularly the troops in Iraq could be vulnerable because they not only face the threat of Iranian-backed militias just across the fence line, but also because ballistic missiles fired from Iran are just a few minutes' flight away.
Very quickly, Ellie, is there any sense within the United States national security apparatus how effective or ineffective an Israel military assault in Iran might be?
So, former and current officials will tell you that without the bunker buster bombs that the U.S. has, and only the U.S. has, that Iran's nuclear program won't be completely destroyed because the nuclear enrichment sites are heavily fortified, deeply underground. It needs penetrative bunker buster bombs to fully go at them. But Israel, if it takes this chance alone, may risk not destroying the entire program, but setting it back enough so that it's not worth it to continue.
Eleanor, we call her Ellie Watson at the Pentagon. Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I want to bring in Weijia Jiang now, who joins us from the North Lawn of the White House. Weijia, the president was talkative about this in a way that I'm unaccustomed to seeing, talking about risks, the idea that Iran needs to get into the negotiating table more seriously, make more concessions, evaluate the day.
Major, you're right in that he spoke actually at length about this, taking several questions during an unrelated event here at the White House. But what he did not offer was any specificity in terms of when there could be an Israeli attack on Iran. He said he did not want to use the word imminent, but said it is something that could happen. And of course, oftentimes actions speak louder than words. And we know that the U.S. has been working to evaluate Americans in the region, to send the message to get out of areas that could be vulnerable. And when asked why, again, the president did not offer details, but he said because it could be dangerous. So even though he's talking around it, he is acknowledging that it is a real possibility that there is an attack on Iran by Israel. And Ellie makes a very important point, Major, that even if the IDF goes at this operation alone, that doesn't mean that the U.S. could not eventually be dragged in if the conflict broadens and if U.S. facilities and forces are involved, which is exactly why the president says he does not want there to be conflict. He is expressing optimism that the U.S. can still broker a nuclear deal with Iran. He says the bottom line, Major, is that they cannot have a nuclear weapon. And we know that his trusted advisor and Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, is set for a 6th round of talks with Tehran on Sunday. So it really matters what happens during that conversation, Major, because today the president said, I hope Israel does not attack as long as there is a chance that that deal could still come to fruition.
And Weijia, this conversation we're having is not in isolation because there was an important announcement and action taken by the UN watchdog agency on nuclear proliferation, International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which said that Iran, according to its inspectors, had been hiding enrichment of nuclear materials and sanctioned Iran for those violations today. This has quite definitely caught the attention of Benjamin Netanyahu and the entire Israeli government.
Absolutely, Major. And you bring up such a critical point because it wasn't that long ago, just weeks ago, that the White House was very clear that the red line for any agreement with Iran has to be that there is zero enrichment of uranium. And that is, what is needed to ultimately create a nuclear weapon, high levels of enrichment of uranium. And there was reporting that we are still trying to pin down that the administration might be open to altering that from 0% to low levels to allow Iran to enrich that for civilian use. But to your point, Major, that watchdog says that they already are working toward enriching it in high levels. And that begs the question whether they are actually serious about sitting down with the U.S. and coming to an agreement when the White House has made so abundantly clear that that is where they have to draw the line. Now, whether that line has moved, that is a really important question, Major, that the president did not answer today.
And Weijia, I just want to explore that question that hangs in the air because it may not be answerable, but when the Obama administration, which I covered, tried to wrestle this, it said, well, if there is regular and frequent inspections of Iranian nuclear facilities and the international community can be certain that the nuclear program is for civilian power generation and cannot be amplified, that's a general term, in the direction of a nuclear weapon, that's something that the international community, including the United States, could live with. Is it knowable if the Trump administration could live with that as well?
Well, Major, you also know what happened when the president came in during office during his first time, and he pulled out of that agreement you're talking about, the JCPOA, because he did not think that was, acceptable, and he wanted more. And he has made so clear, Major, that that is where he stands on this. However, it's worth noting today that he kept saying that For him, what's important is that they're never able to develop a nuclear weapon. Again, we're talking at that point about those high levels of enrichment. We really need to get an answer, Major, from President Trump about whether he has moved that goalpost and whether he is willing to accept what you just laid out there under the Obama administration.
Excellent reporting, as always, from Weijia Jiang in the North Lawn of the White House. Thanks so much. I'm going to move over to the conversation corner, which I have the desire to do sometimes, especially when I have a great guest who's going to amplify our conversation even more. Ben Jensen joins me now. He is with the Center for Strategic International Studies, a friend of the show. Thanks for coming back.
Great to see you.
So glad you are here. Help my audience understand how this week has sort of accelerated. And now we're talking, the President of the United States is talking ways he typically doesn't about something that could happen. And the phrase they use at the Pentagon all the time is kinetic strike, Israel, Iran.
So first, to say this situation is explosive is an understatement. Iran and Israel are standing on a powder keg dipped in gasoline at a redneck picnic with fireworks going off. And to say why that is...
I get the picture.
Yeah, one cigarette, boom. And it's scary, you're right. The president is trying to publicly signal, so this goes back to a long literature on deterrence and coercion. He is using his kind of position to publicly signal restraint. Israel's not listening. And what's scarier than what happened about roughly a year ago, so April 13th, 2024, Iran launched Operation True Promise. 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, 120 ballistic missiles that Israel, the U.S., and other allies shot down and stopped a broader escalation. Israel responded with limited strikes. This will not be limited this time. Iran has to hit harder to show that it can. And Israel, if it wants to take out Iran's nuclear infrastructure, is going to have to hit those ballistic missiles, is going to have to hit intelligence facilities. It's probably going to have to target Iranian leadership. So it's very hard to see a world in which we don't step very close to the abyss in the next 7 days.
Can Israel accomplish that without the United States?
That's the big question. So one thing we do know is do not underestimate Israel's ability to conduct complex covert operations matched with long-range precision strikes. So everything from the wild stuff with the pagers and the radios to their ability without us to launch precision strikes that actually took out Iran's most advanced air defense systems 5 days after that True Promise attack back in April. So I think Israel actually could. The question is how long can they keep it up? And that's where they need the U.S. to provide the intelligence, to provide the weapons. And that's the hard political question for our president if this goes forward.
What are the facilities that Israel would be most likely to attack, and what are the hardest to get to?
Yeah, great question. I think they have a couple different strike packages. If you and I were planning with them, here would be our debate. One is, hey, do I use shock and surprise and instantly hit the nuclear facilities? Try to crater them and limit the escalation. So I only hit nuclear infrastructure. I don't actually hit the leadership. I don't hit the military. The other package, which is actually similar to our debate in the Cuban Missile Crisis, when you go look at the historical files, is actually before I hit the nuclear facilities, I have to hit their air defenses, and I have to hit the ballistic missiles that Iran would use to fire at Israeli cities. There's no way, as good as Israel's air defenses are, they could intercept 1,000 ballistic missiles fired within a 48-hour period. So that's going to be the big planning debate going for the Israelis. Shock and surprise, hit the nuclear facilities and see if Iran retaliates, or actually conduct a multi-day, if not multi-month air campaign that rolls back Iranian missiles, air defenses, and then the nuclear facilities.
Back to your very vivid, and appropriately so, vivid metaphor at the top. Is there a way in which this conversation is trying to redirect Iran and say, look, yeah, you're on this powder keg, but there's a little garden over here where you can sit, trade with the United States, you can have a civilian nuclear program, maybe, maybe not, but you can't have the bomb?
Yeah. I think you saw our president actually tease that, right? Sometimes
that's what I was hearing.
I heard it too. Sometimes the president will almost use this way where he says one thing and then he makes a conditional claim on the other side. That's what I heard him say. It's like, well, this could lead us to a huge war, but it could also pressure the negotiations. And so it's clear that our president, Trump, has actually signaled to the Israelis he doesn't want them to strike right now. The CENTCOM commander Kurilla just canceled his visit. We're pulling our diplomats' families out. So I think you see actually more sophisticated signaling game going on in Washington than they're getting credit for right now. Now, is it enough? I don't know. What I do know is the president is right to call for some restraint here and hopefully walk us back, because there's no telling once this starts how far it goes.
You well remember, Ben, reading the history of the Vietnam War, that one of the things that Richard Nixon as president tried to convince the North Vietnamese is he was a crazy man who might just do anything. In this scenario, I wonder if in this particular approach that President Trump has just taken today and this signaling, he's telling the Iranians, the crazy person is Netanyahu. I'm not as crazy as he is, so you better deal with me.
Yeah. I mean, this is where you get to some really interesting, complex negotiations that you're right. What's the old James Brown line? I don't know karate. I know Karazer. I'm so nuts you don't know what I'm going to do. And definitely showing that you are the rational actor in the room, which isn't normally our president's strategy in these negotiations, could open something up. But Iran's already signaling they'll target U.S. bases, even though we're offering the olive branch. They're already publicly saying they'll make new enrichment facilities. So there is a darker current coming out of their signaling, which, careful, because someone's going to have to now hit them on it. And I think the Israelis they've been ready to go for months.
It's a conversation corner, but we also learn a great deal here, especially when you're in the conversation corner.
Always happy to see you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Still to come on the Takeout, you might have seen this video.
I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the Secretary.
A U.S. Senator dragged out of an immigration press conference. We'll speak to a top advisor to Customs and Border Patrol. We will also hear from a California mayor who says his community is unnerved by recent immigration enforcement.
This does impact our community, and it does create fear.
And the death penalty in America, 22 executions this year, 2 by firing squad. We will discuss with Amnesty International. All that ahead on the Takeout. Welcome back to the Takeout. California Democratic Senator Alex Padilla was forcibly removed from a press conference today where Homeland Security Secretary Noem was speaking. He was handcuffed, briefly detained, then released. Democratic and Republican senators have denounced this. Alaska Republican Lisa Murkowski said the footage was, quote, shocking at every level, not the America I know, unquote. House Speaker Mike Johnson suggested Padilla should be censured. The White House called it a stunt. As for Secretary Noem, she called the episode inappropriate, that's a quote, but later met with Padilla and said the two exchanged phone numbers. Carter Evans was in the room and he joins me now. Carter, what'd you see? What happened?
Okay, I want to try and describe exactly what I saw here. I happen to be rolling on my camera at the moment, so I was looking at the secretary, and out of the corner of my eye, I see an individual emerging from the press corps, taking steps toward the secretary. She's still giving her opening remarks here, trying to ask a question, saying, I have a question. And immediately security is on him because as he is saying these questions, as he is speaking, he is taking steps approaching the secretary at the podium. So security grabs him, moves him out. And I got to tell you, I didn't recognize him at first either. And then a few seconds later, as they're dragging him out of the room, he identifies himself as Alex Padilla, a U.S. senator. And then another camera picks up what happened outside. He was brought outside of the room, put face down on the ground, and handcuffed. Outside, Secretary Noem said that they spoke. They had a good conversation. She said that she wished that he had identified himself before approaching the podium and interrupting. I tried to ask the senator why he chose that particular time to ask that question. Why didn't he wait for the question and answer period? Why did he choose to interrupt her during her opening remarks? And he declined to answer any questions. He did say he was here for a different reason, and he realized this press conference was going on. So he came downstairs because he said he had questions for Homeland Security that had not been answered, and he thought that this would be a good place to ask them.
Carter Evans, with all that perspective and on-scene reporting, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I want to bring in Ron Patella, who is a senior advisor for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He's also former acting director of ICE. That was from 2018 to 2019. It's great to have you here. Thanks so much.
Delighted.
Evaluate that situation for my audience.
Well, it's jarring to see a senator do that. It's jarring to see it happen, what happened to him.
On both sides, it's jarring.
It is. It is. What I heard, the media reports after was that the detail didn't know who he was. I think there's some important context there, right? She's in the continuity of government, so she travels with the Secret Service like detail for dignitary protection. And the initial reports say that they didn't know who he was. He was yelling and charging the stage, if you will, and they acted as they're trained.
Is there anything about the training that suggests, and I know this is not your exact area of expertise, but in general, if someone says, I'm a U.S. Senator, then you start moving back and de-escalate the situation?
I doubt it. I don't know. I mean, how would they know? If they didn't recognize him as the senator, I could say I'm the president of the United States, right? He would, who would be able to verify that?
Well, most people would have been able to handle that one. I think we and I would agree. But let's move on to the broader context. This is becoming an inflamed conversation in our country that puts those who are with ICE or Border Patrol into some measure of risk and jeopardy. It also puts citizens in risk if they're protesting and bad actors come in to interfere. Is there anything that you see in this scenario that can or should be de-escalated?
The propaganda.
Whose?
The people that are trying to convince Americans that being in the country illegally is not a crime. You have a lot of the media, present company excluded, but a lot of the media, a lot of the left are saying that this shouldn't happen. That we had the leader in the House a couple of days ago said that this was an overreach. The men and women on the front line are doing the job that they're hired to do. They're enforcing law that have been on the books for quite some time. And Hakeem Jeffries and other people in the House that are decrying what's going on and saying it shouldn't happen and saying that it's an overreach actually fund the activity of ICE and the detention centers and the officers and the fugitive operations that are out there. It's very stressful for the front line, quite dangerous, and their families deserve better.
The president said today on social media that changes are coming, that there should not be widespread immigration enforcement on agricultural areas and in the leisure industry, meaning hotels and restaurants specifically. So those people are illegal. The president's acknowledged they're illegal, but he said, well, maybe we should use a lighter approach there. Is that propagandistic?
I haven't seen the remarks. I've been out of the office today, so I'm not exactly sure what he said or in what context. But the men and women that were there, when this all started, ICE was in Los Angeles for a very specific reason. They had, on day one of that operation, 77 targets. People who were in the country illegally have also committed heinous crimes against the citizens of Los Angeles or that area. That's why they were there. The reaction that happened is not a protest, right? The riots that started after they tried to do their job and the late response by the city, it puts us in the situation that we're in. It appears that things are calming as it relates to we're going back to protests and away from riots, and I'm happy for the front line, and I'm happy for that to be happening. But that's the problem. People are trying to convince Americans that we shouldn't be doing this work.
And to that point, the White House, through Stephen Miller, has set a goal, if not a quota, of 3,000 immigration arrests per day. Is that possible, number one, as a practical matter? And number two, does that run the risk of bringing into detention facilities those who are not criminals, but who might fall into this category that the president on social media today said he was now sensitized to?
Crossing the border illegally is a crime. That's part of the problem. People are trying to say that it isn't. And so when we go from 10,000 people crossing the border illegally a day, 85%, which were released under the Biden administration, this is the reaction to that. The president ran on this issue. He said he was going to secure the border, which at CBP we've done a really good job at, I want to say, thanks to the front line and the authority of the president and the direction of the Secretary of Homeland Security. But now the deportation efforts need to begin, and they have begun. ICE is doing a good job. We want them to do a great job. And so whatever the number is, the people that they're going to encounter are going to be here illegally. That's the job of immigration enforcement.
There's a detention process, as you just mentioned a couple of times. My understanding of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the detention space currently is at capacity. Are we going to have to require ourselves to engage military bases or rapidly build private detention facilities to handle the volume and the means by which to achieve the goals you just outlined?
There's two ways to do that. Use what we have more efficiently, which is kind of the con ops right now. What they're doing now is just trying to use the detention space that they have in the most efficient way possible. And then, adding
what does efficient mean?
That means people stay.
Processing more rapidly, getting them out of the country more rapidly?
Right, exactly.
More flights, more buses, et cetera.
Exactly.
How's that going?
They've moved the days in custody down quite a bit. When this president took office, we had at CBP we had about 6,800 people in CBP facilities not designed for long-term detention. Right now, that number is less than 600. So you can use the resources that you have more efficiently, and ICE engage in that activity. But this will require more investment for them to scale up to the numbers that people are talking about.
Ron, describe for my audience the current operational reality on the border where CBP works most regularly.
Yeah, so a little bit of context. Last year, if you average out the activity over the 365 days of 2024, about 4,300 people came to the border on average every single night. Overwhelming every system, overwhelming every facility that CBP has in its hands. And they did surge to that activity, but they were still overwhelmed every single day. Last night, less than 200 people tried to cross the border illegally. Most of them were apprehended, and most of those were prosecuted in federal court for illegal entering the country. So there's been a dramatic, almost a 100% increase in capability and about a 95% decrease in the activity at the southwest border. The illegal crossings are down 95%. Our agents are seeing and capturing more drugs. They're able to save more people in distress. They're able to rescue more children that are being trafficked because they have now time on task to do the interviews and communicate directly. They're not overwhelmed by the system now.
Ron Vitale, I appreciate the perspective and the expertise. I hope you come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just days after ousting the entire CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tapped allies and COVID vaccine critics and put them in their place. What those changes might mean, next on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for staying with us. Here is a look at what else we, and now you, are watching this evening. Amid horror in India, one miracle. This India Air Boeing 787 Dreamliner lost altitude shortly after takeoff from Ahmedabad in western India and burst into flames on impact. The flight was headed for London. Here's the miracle part. A 40-year-old British national survived. 241 passengers and crew perished. Also, 50 medical students were hospitalized as the plane crashed into a doctor's hostel. Two police officers who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th have filed a civil suit to force lawmakers to display a plaque honoring those who served and were assaulted that day. Our Scott McFarland reports the officers seek fulfillment of a 2022 law that requires this honorary plaque to be displayed by March 2023. That plaque, however, remains in storage. House Speaker Mike Johnson has not committed to its public display. David Hogg is out as vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. The 25-year-old activist stepped down after the DNC announced new elections for his post. Hogg has been involved, as you might remember, in a lengthy and at times ugly spat with party leaders over his efforts to defeat incumbent House Democrats that he, Hogg, says are, quote, asleep at the wheel. Critics accuse Hogg, however, of wasting money on intra-party squabbles. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has announced 8 new advisors to serve on the CDC's vaccine recommendation panel. This after he fired all 17 sitting members earlier this week. Our health reporter, an expert in this field, Alex Tin, joins me now. Alex, always great to have you here at the family table. Walk us through what's happened and what it might mean.
Yeah, so just to recap for the people who weren't following this week, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., during the confirmation process, one of the big fears that people had was that he would do just this. He would fire all of the members of the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee and replace them with his own picks. What happened on Monday is that he announced he was firing all of them. What happened on Wednesday is that he announced these 8 new picks, most of whom are either allies of him or have clearly criticized COVID-19 vaccines and requirements and vaccine safety in the past. And then the other thing he did, which I think a lot of people may have missed, is that he also removed all of the career officials who sort of set the guardrails around this process, who set the agenda, who vet them, who planned the meetings. All those people are gone too. And so now we have a June meeting coming up later this month, 25, 26, 27, where they're going to make votes on a whole bunch of vaccine recommendations, including for COVID-19, with a whole new set of advisors that have now been handpicked by the secretary. Going back to the confirmation process, does what happened this week conflict with what he said he was intending to do? Yeah, I mean, it depends on who you ask. The secretary claims that it doesn't conflict with his promise. He says that the promise he made to Senator Bill Cassidy, that's the top Republican on the Senate's Health Committee, was not that he wouldn't change the committee's membership, simply that he would allow Cassidy to have a say on who is on the panel, to pick somebody to join the panel. Cassidy didn't say that. Cassidy said initially that the only reason he was supporting Kennedy was because of this promise not to change the committee. Of course, Cassidy has also sort of changed the story now. He says that the commitment he got from Kennedy was not to change the structure of the committee as opposed to not changing who is on the committee. So clearly both sides sort of changing their story here.
But this has implications for, as you outlined, Alex, the structure and the personnel. We'll keep an eye on it. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
When they just started banging on the doors. And everybody turned, looked outside, and we saw that it was Homeland Security.
The threat of ICE agents targeting workplaces is spreading a degree of fear across our country. That, according to our next guest, who you'll hear from here on The Takeout. Welcome back. This week, as you know, we have covered immigration enforcement activity all across the country and the protests that have also sprouted across the country. For officials in a majority Latino community that has yet to encounter these raids, it's starting to feel like a raid is only a matter of time. On the big screen right in front of me, I'm joined now by the mayor of Montebello, California, Salvador Melendez. Mr. Mayor, it's great to see you. You are quoted as saying, Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement hasn't arrived, but the sense in your community is that they're already there, psychologically. What do you mean by that?
That's correct. You know, for the past 7 days, these ICE raids have impacted all of our neighboring cities. City of LA, we're right next to East LA. We're less than 15 minutes from the city of LA. And as I mentioned, even though physically ICE has not been or provided or has done any raids in the city of Montebello, psychologically, they're here in our community. And what I mean by that is that our community's in fear, our community's not going to work, our community is staying home. There's so much fear in our community to just even go out and do their daily task. And that's because it's just, we all feel that it's just imminent on when ICE is going to come to our communities. It's extremely a difficult time, a frustrating time, and it's a fear that has been already planted in our communities.
Is it affecting basic things such as school attendance, work attendance, people showing up to do things in hospitals or other parts of your community?
Absolutely. I've talked to a lot of the business owners here in the community, and it's not just their staff that's not showing up, but it's also, seeing the impact in some of the businesses in the food industry where people are not going to eat. People are just staying home. And let me make this clear. It's not that these folks are undocumented or don't have a legal status. It's just that there's a fear that the administration is currently, I'm sorry about that.
Motion detecting lights, I know how they work.
There we go. Yeah, we went.
This is a highly informal conversational show, Mr. Mayor, and I thank you for adding to that flair. There we go. It's not a power outage, it's just a motion detected light.
That's it. But where I was getting to, it's we've seen the impact that it's had in our communities, and a lot of these folks, a lot of these workers, a lot of the people that go into these businesses, they have status. It's just the mere fact of feeling like they're being targeted because they're Latino, because they look a certain way, and that's the fear that's being created not just in Montebello but in all of our surrounding communities.
So I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if you heard Ron Vitello, who is a senior advisor to Customs Border Protection on our program just a few moments ago, but he said it's propaganda for anyone to say that there can't be enforcement, even for those who are not criminals in our country who entered illegal. Anyone who entered illegally can and should be rounded up.
Look, let me be clear. Folks that come here are hardworking individuals that just want to make sure that they can provide for their families. And I can tell you that my father came here undocumented, and he came here because he wanted to provide us with a better life. And he loves his country. He's a proud American. He's been able to become a citizen, and he's been able to build something here. And a lot of these families and a lot of these people have that same story. We're not criminals. We're not folks that are breaking the law. There's just we want to have a better life, and I think that's the mixed messaging that's being sent out there, that anybody who crosses here is an illegal criminal that is here to take advantage of this country, that's not producing, that's not that's taking advantage of our system. Look, we have hardworking people here that this country needs in order for us to continue to be the nation that we are. We're a nation of immigrants, and this fear mongering, these tactics of just raiding, Home Depots, going after the food vendors, going after, folks that work in the car wash. This is not going after criminals. This is going after hardworking families, and we're breaking families apart. We take the breadwinner of the family. Guess what now? Now there's two kids that don't have somebody to produce for them, or don't have won't be able to, might be homeless. And this is just creating an issue that of communities that already are suffering from a lot of problems. So it's this fear mongering. It's impacting. It's tearing apart our communities, and we want this to stop here.
The mayor of Montebello, California, just east of Los Angeles, Salvador Melendez. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
This morning, Oklahoma executed a man convicted of murder. What is the future of capital punishment? That is next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Today, Oklahoma officials carried out the execution of 61-year-old John Fitzgerald Hansen, making him the 22nd person in the United States to receive the death penalty since President Trump returned to office. That's 21 more than during the same period of President Biden's term. We should note the 22 executions this year were conducted by state officials, not under the auspices of the federal government. The most recent federal executions were carried out during President Trump's first administration, 13 in all. Joining me now, Justin Mazzola, researcher for Amnesty International. Justin, thank you so much for joining us. Is there, from your perspective, any correlation between President Trump's return to office and a numerical acceleration in executions in our country?
No, I don't think so, Major. I think you have to remember that when President Biden took office, we were still in the midst of the pandemic, and we saw a huge decline in the number of executions that were being carried out at the state level. And of course, he immediately implemented a moratorium on all federal executions following the 13 that you mentioned from President Trump. So it's kind of comparing apples and oranges in terms of, time frames. But what we've seen is over the last 4 years now is that the states have started to introduce executions at the rate that they were prior to the pandemic. So, we saw a complete shutdown during that year and a half period when, everybody was, home and courts weren't working and things like that. So that's kind of where we've seen that change. But really what we've seen, the difference really goes back to pre-pandemic levels.
For my audience's benefit, Amnesty International opposes capital punishment. The president, in an executive order signed his first day upon returning to the office, said it was necessary at the federal level to punish the most heinous crimes and deter those heinous crimes. From your academic research perspective, what is the deterrent effect of capital punishment?
Absolutely none. We've seen now over decades that whether or not a state has or doesn't have capital punishment on the books as a sentence has absolutely no impact on the level of crime rate in a particular state or across the federal government. And so really what we see is that there are all sorts of issues with how it is then implemented, and oftentimes it could be implemented on racially biased ways. It's very arbitrary in terms of jurisdictions that use it, that don't, within a particular state, for instance. And so it really does question the viability of why we still have the death penalty here in the United States to begin with.
How about the application of the death penalty at the federal level, which the president, any president, would have much more influence over?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally the same. We saw this with the 13 executions that took place under Trump. Those cases were riddled with issues, including individuals with intellectual disabilities, severe mental illness, again, arbitrariness in terms of the use of the death penalty in their case versus other similar cases within the same state, and also issues around racial bias, ineffective assistance of counsel. These are all issues that plague the capital punishment system in the states and in the federal government. And what we saw was really, over that 6-month period at the end of his term, including some for the first time in over 100 years, some executions taking place during the lame duck period of his term, is really a machinery of death that was implemented just for spectacle.
Justin, as I mentioned, 2 recent executions by firing squad. What's that about?
Yeah, as states have had more and more problems in securing the drugs that are necessary for the lethal injection protocols that they have on their books, they're now resorting to more archaic forms of execution. They've sought to bring back other things like the electric chair, and now firing squad seems to be the newest method. We've also seen the use of nitrogen hypoxia in several states, and that seems to be expanding now. As what people are saying is a more humane method for killing people. There is no humane method for killing an individual, whether that's by firing squad, lethal injection, or nitrogen gas. And so this is why it needs to be abolished once and for all in our country.
Does the firing squad capture some method or measure of the public's desire for retribution in ways possibly that lethal injection doesn't or didn't?
No, I don't think so. I think the fact that we are killing people, it's not any kind of retribution, it's revenge. And so whether that's by firing squad or lethal injection, the ultimate result is the same. And it really is a revenge killing by the state for a punishment that really should no longer exist.
Justin, there'll be some in my audience who would say, then what, if not the death penalty, do you favor? And isn't that, meaning lifelong incarceration, more expensive?
No, actually, studies have shown that it's actually more expensive between the amount of time and efforts that are put into capital punishment trials and sentencing at the first level, as well as all the rounds of appeals that usually go through. You're also talking about individuals who sit on death row for decades, oftentimes, which is a more expensive way to house individuals rather than in general population. These costs all add up, and it's actually less expensive to hold somebody for life than it is to kill them.
Justin Mazzola, Amnesty International. I appreciate the time and the conversation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Major.
That's it for the Takeout today. Tomorrow on the show, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster shares his thoughts on the Middle East, the tensions there, and President Trump's planned military parade for Saturday. Plus, apparently, Gen Z does not like to keep an open tab at the bar. I did not know this until this week. My journey to investigate takes me to a collegiate watering hole. It was kind of fun. Stick around. The Daily Report coming up next right here on CBS News 24/7.